Untold History of the United States. This is episode 2. This is a fascinating episode. Like a lot of things that I didn't even know about, which basically there's many things I don't know about, but this is especially what I didn't know about. It's titled Roosevelt, Wallace, and Truman. So basically what this episode is basically about Henry Wallace, who's the kind of the main character of this episode. He's the forgotten man. He's the man who was the vice president in 1940 when Roosevelt was elected again, and he was a very leftist guy. He was the Secretary of Agriculture during the 1930s. He was part of Roosevelt's cabinet. He really was the instigator in helping out the economy and getting out of the depression and helping bring back farms and bringing back employees back in the workforce. Henry Wallace was a very liberal person, very leftist person, and Roosevelt rewarded him and made him vice president in 1940. So, but what happened is that Wallace had a lot of agendas, and Wallace made a famous speech about the average working man. So very much helping out the average person. That's what the agenda should be. So it was very much a socialistic speech. So he got a lot of bad press, but at the same time, a lot of the working people back, especially during the World War II, there was a lot of like social change going on. The birth of a lot of unions because economically, a lot of corporations, of course, made a lot of money during the war, and of course they didn't really help the working man that much. So there's a lot of setups of unions and helping out the working man, and Wallace was the instigator. So the Democratic Party kind of wanted to push Wallace out of the White House when the next election came up for Roosevelt, who was obviously going to be the Democratic representative again. And so they wanted Wallace out because Wallace was too liberal, and he didn't really listen to anybody, and he had his own agenda, and he didn't like the A-bomb too, and he wanted to get rid of the A-bomb. He was very much very much a pacifist. He was very much about the average person, and so Wallace was kicked out like during the Democratic Convention in 1944, and a guy who was unknown at the time, who was very much a patsy and really didn't have much political experience. They brought in Truman, because Truman was a guy who basically didn't have many enemies. He was kind of like sat at the fence and everything like that. And during that whole convention, which was kind of illegal if you really look at it in hindsight, because the people didn't really represent that convention, and they kind of was more of the political leaders that pushed Wallace out of the White House, the forgotten man in many ways. And of course Truman was brought back in, and of course 82 days after Roosevelt was re-elected in 1944, he passed away, and Truman became the President of the United States. So this is what Oliver Stone's trying to tell us about, like, what if Henry Wallace was the President of the United States? The whole world would have changed, like literally, in so many ways. That's Oliver Stone's theory, at least, and it's something that's not even talked about at all, because the problem with Truman is that the guy was overwhelmed. He was scared. There's documents about his doing interviews, and like he did not want to be president because he was scared shitless, pardon my French, about being president. And of course, that what happened was that there was a lot of corporate patsies that came in, and basically who became cabinet members that Roosevelt never really listened to, like the CEO of GM. All these like big corporations have kind of started like pushing and bending Truman's ear, and like getting Truman to like listen to basically follow their advice, because they didn't get the A-bomb and get rid of Japan and basically really take over Germany, and don't let Germany kind of like get its just basically take down the whole goddamn country. And basically Wallace would never have stand for that. And of course this is a setup to the A-bomb that's going to happen a year from now. So Truman really was an overwhelmed guy. He brought in a lot of like corporate people to like bend his ear, and that's what Oliver Stone is basically trying to tell us. There's also a side plot in this episode about the Soviets, and about really how the Soviets get a really bum shake in 1944 as well, where the Soviets basically had 29 million people die in World War II. They held up Germany, and you can also argue that they basically, after the Germany's declared, after the Germany's died off, they basically helped the Americans with the Japanese War. They came from the north. People can argue that there's no way that war would have been settled if it wasn't for the Russians. And then Truman and Stalin didn't like each other, and Stalin thought that Truman was very unappreciative of this, and it sets up the Cold War that's going to happen later on. But then at the same time, it's like all about this shadow of Henry Wallace that nobody knows about now, that what would happen if Henry Wallace was the VP. That's my review.